Mr. Fraser?
Here.
Mr. Land? Is not here. Mr. Seibert?
Here.
Ms. Seymour?
Here.
Ms. Jordan?
Here.
You have 5 members present.
All right.
5 members.
Yeah, right. Okay, item on our agenda is the presentation of lighting requirements, and that's going to come through our planning and
Thank you, Council President. Good evening, Council, Mayor, members of the public. Staff would like to do a presentation for you on architectural lighting regulations. Staff, Planning Department did receive a petition for lighting, architectural lighting, in this case neon, on a number of buildings within the city of Southfield last year. And because staff and the zoning ordinance did not contain any regulations on this type of lighting, we actually went into a moratorium for architectural lighting within the city while staff put together regulations for this particular thing. The Legislative Committee saw a brief presentation on architectural lighting back in October, and this particular item did go through the Planning Commission in December and did clear the Planning Commission on December 17th. With that, I'd just like to kind of briefly give you an overview of the proposal here. As I had noted, the Planning Department did receive this request for neon bans on several buildings in the city, included the Red Roof Inn on Northwestern Highway, the Victory Inn, and the Wendy's Restaurant on Telegraph Road. And as I noted earlier, we are currently in a moratorium until February 20th of this year. The 3 buildings, again, in question, the Wendy's on Telegraph Road, Victory Inn, Red Roof. You will note here, a little bit difficult to see, but red band along the building facade here. On the Victory Inn, not only did they ask for a green band under the facade, but also red bands around the windows. This is also a proposal here on the side of the Victory Inn. The last item for the Red Roof Inn was not only a red band along the facade here, also a red band going up this particular architectural feature. They actually went a little bit further and put red bands up and down the posts for the signage, as well as the light poles in the parking lot. So there are 2 types of lighting that we felt that we would need to regulate within the city. The first is accent lighting, such as indirect wall lighting or channelized lighting. And the 2 examples here, the CVS on 11 and Lofts Road, as well as across the street, the small strip center there that contains the Potbelly, the Chipotle, and then the Biggie Coffee. And you can see the indirect lighting here on the building, and then channelized lighting, which is actually going to meet the east here. The other kind of lighting had to do with, again, neon. First is the Fridays across the street here with the neon bands you can see on the top of the building. The other item is also the Marvin Gardens. This is on Northwestern Highway with the green band. Other types of lighting that we currently have within the city, this is the Arbor Lofts. Underneath the canopy on the south side of the building, they do have light bulbs that are recessed into the canopy itself. And then during the holidays, these blue lights showed up on top of the building itself. And I don't know if you can see them from here, but that did show up during the holiday season. One of the other items that has kind of come about recently here in the city and in other cities is this window lighting. Showed up about 6 months or so ago, and pretty intense lighting. In some cases, the ability to turn 5 different colors in succession, sometimes at a rapid period.
If I could, I just want to talk a little bit about that. So what we had in the past were a lot less output from both neon and from the first generation of light-emitting diode LED lights. Now we're starting to see a new generation that's far brighter and far more capable to do other things, either change color, run, flash, do just about anything now. And we're seeing this show up during the moratorium. We've seen it show up quite a bit, and it seems to be going from site to site to site throughout Southfield. So we also do have, and these installations were never done with even an electrical permit, which would have been required by the building code to at least have an electrical permit. They just kind of show up in the windows. So, and we also have a video to show you.
You'll be able to see the lights change.
Now, mind you, these can change, if you get the right set, they can change to 4 or 5 different colors. They can also, you know, chase or run or do quite a few things.
From the standpoint of regulations, when we actually are trying to put together certain regulations for these types of lighting, we looked at the accent lighting, and in this case, we would regulate indirect wall lighting, uplighting, and channelized lighting behind translucent lenses. Would be permitted provided there's a decorative or architectural feature of the building, that they're not exposed, and used only for backlighting. And there would be approval process for all non-residential zoning districts. For visible neon, fiber optic, and similar lighting, again, they would be decorative or an architectural feature to accent three-dimensional architectural elements, not connected to signage, and it would be permitted on any side of the building not facing residential, provided one, does not exceed 1 linear foot of lighting for each linear foot of building facade on the side in which it's placed. So that means if you have a 100-foot wide building, you can have 100 feet of lighting, and that's it. Now, if you want to go above and beyond that 1 foot of lighting per linear foot of building facade, that would end up counting against your maximum allowable signage for the building itself. That would be calculated by 0.5 times the linear foot of the additional lighting that you want to put on. So if you wanted to put 10 additional feet of lighting, divide that by 0.5, and that would then be 5 square feet
reduction in your wall sign area.
Decorative lighting used during the recognized holidays shall be allowed in all zoning districts and would not be subject to the regulations. In addition, within the Downtown Development Authority and the City Center District, both of those boards would have to recommend for or against this type of lighting within their various districts. Only allowed within non-residential zoning, and shall be subject to the development agreement in any overlay development district. Regulation areas. As I noted, these would be within the City Center District, the Downtown Development Authority area, as well as along the major corridors, Northwestern Highway, 696, Southfield Road, and Telegraph Road. We thought this would be a good starting point instead of putting a blanket over the entire city, just to start with key areas within the city itself, and then go from there. Maintenance. With regard to maintenance in itself, this is the Kirby's on Telegraph Road. You can see on the building itself that we have some neon that started to fail. We do want to make sure that there are maintenance within the ordinance itself, and then any penalties and enforcements that might be required. Next steps. Some of the conversations that we've had over the past week or so has kind of focused on interior window lighting as window signage. Again, we would like to start with at least the neon bands and the lighting as presented tonight, with a possibility to move into interior lighting and then the window signage at a later date. And with that, is there any questions?
Any questions, Council? Mr. Cyber?
So anybody that's got something is grandfathered then, if this is approved?
That would be it would be grandfathered if it was an approved installation or if it was installed. If it was installed during the moratorium, no, that would not be a grandfathered in situation or legal non-conforming.
I'm thinking particularly about that limousine place on Telegraph with the...
That was put in before the moratorium.
Yeah, it's really great. The hot
Oh,
thing
we didn't
going
talk
around
about
the
that. I'm sorry. We were going to talk about the lighting output, remember?
Oh, yeah, we can.
Okay, so we're also within that, within this ordinance, we've got some language in there to deal with the output of the tubing itself. We have the same conditions or the same requirements in the sign ordinance for electronic signs. There's a distance that they get measured from, and they have to be less than 0.3 foot candles above ambient light conditions. We have adopted that same language is within there so that we can actually test these systems to make sure that they're not of those brightness scales. But as far as an installation, and it's a little bit for the city attorney, but as far as I can tell, anything that was installed during the moratorium would not be legal non-conforming or grandfathered in. Things before that would be, even if they didn't have any sort of electrical permit or anything applied for them.
Yeah,
Correct?
probably.
Okay.
We could take a look at that, but I would
Okay.
say in general, you're right.
Okay.
And if I may just add on to that, when we showed you the picture, the video of the lights that change, within the text amendment itself, we do state that lighting that has any motion, either constant or at intervals, or gives any impression of motion, running, blinking, expanding, contracting, changing light patterns would be prohibited. So within this ordinance, we would not allow the type of lighting that you saw there in the video.
Well, we certainly don't want to, and a lot of people comment about the south side of 8 Mile, where the lights are so bright, it's almost like daylight. A lot of glare, especially in a rain event. I think that's my question. When did I'm forgetting when we put the moratorium.
October?
Is it October?
I don't recall the exact date. It was, I believe it was 180 days,
Yeah.
and it's up February 20th.
I thought it was 120 days.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes, did you put any restrictions in? You said for recognized holidays, you would allow that. Did you say how much before and after the?
That question did come up, and I think that's probably a good discussion point here with the council as to whether, do we want to put a time frame on those recognized holidays, a week, 2 weeks or so before, and a week or two after. So that has been open for discussion.
It kind of did bring into a discussion the whole thing. A lot of cities do regulate how long you can have your Christmas lights up or whatever to a certain period after. Now, we have not done that. So we thought this kind of put that issue kind of back in front of us, and if council wanted to direct, we could go back and do some homework on that if you thought that that was a good idea. Recognizing also that, people are putting up a lot of lights for Halloween now. I mean, it's not just the Christmas, Hanukkah time. It's really a lot of the holidays. I mean, I see them on Valentine's Day, a lot of the Easter. So if we're going to have that discussion, it will be, more in tune with all of the kind of recognized holidays, but we certainly would be prepared to do that if council wanted to.
4th of July, I saw.
Sure, if you want us to take on that review.
Yeah, that's, we're talking about light villages, and I know you're trying to recognize and control the foot candles of light, but even if you designate a certain foot candles for a building, when there are 2 or 3 buildings right side by side, that's additive, that's not just,
Correct.
it doesn't absorb. And growing up in the country, dark skies are nice, but I recognize the fact that businesses have to advertise their business, but it really needs to be tasteful, tastefully done, and I certainly wish that we could not have red lights around every window, and I mean I realize they're advertising their product.
Right.
That's what I say, yeah, red lights around every window. So,
If I may, to the chair, we've actually addressed that in here too, that we would not allow the lights around the doors and the windows in themselves. That would also be...
except they were in before,
Right, correct.
so we got to live with that.
Correct.
Now, let me ask you another question. Is there anything that would allow us to break that covenant contract or whatever it is if the building changes hands?
We need to really address that, because there's also a way that over time you can put in a process where those things are phased out. So I think if there's an interest, again, for us to take a look at what can be done about the existing lights, you know, we'll definitely do that in
Yeah.
conjunction, and maybe we can even come up with a program to kind of phase them out. Yeah, and maybe at least on when the property changes hands potentially, so we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, 'cause some of that is really tacky.
Or when the tenancy changes
Mhm,
besides just
mhm.
property.
Sure.
It's pretty common with signs, and a lot of communities have a table actually that they use, an amount of time that they have for things to come into compliance.
Exactly, and you come up with
use
a...
the same similar language that you would have for that to
Right.
come into
And
compliance.
again, most of the times, as long as that's a reasonable period,
Yes.
because obviously a person has made an investment,
Correct.
and if you say overnight it's got to come out, they never really got a chance to kind of even depreciate that investment.
Sure.
So we certainly could take a look at that,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would appreciate something like
Okay,
that.
okay.
Okay.
Mr. Cruz.
Yeah, I just had a question, if you could just revisit for me the portion you mentioned about the amount of lighting they could have versus 1 foot of wall space. Could you just explain that to me? Is that
Yeah,
what
actually,
you
I could probably go to one of the existing,
that would show?
yep, this actually would show. The linear feet, so we have the tower here as well as this portion of the building. So really, all that you could have is basically what they have out there right now on that particular building on Fridays, is the red band as it stands today. Along
Also,
that edge.
you'd probably count this,
You
too.
could, yeah.
And it goes back a little ways, too, but it doesn't have the red stripe. But pretty much any surface of a wall, follow it all the way around, it would be permitted, because that would be the same length as the building. So, this length, as long as it didn't face a residential area.
You know, I would raise the question, when somebody moves out, possibility of everything goes back, must come in under the new ordinance. There's a bank in town that has, on top of their 36-story building, a big sign. They made a big thing about moving out of the city and moved to Detroit. Do they take the sign with them, or do they leave that on as a permanent billboard now? Or do they have occupancy?
They still have some people, I think 150 people are still here.
Do they?
I think so.
Yeah, I think there's a small contingency left, yeah.
That's pretty much open to the building owner. The building owner allows
The naming thing.
the naming of that, and I,
So I thought you have to be a tenant in order to have a sign on your building.
no, we don't. In fact, the new regulations that came in for high-rise signage talk about a certain amount, 10% of the building facade.
Yeah.
So, I mean, realistically, I don't think that they would be putting a non-tenant up there. I highly doubt they would be doing that. It's
Okay.
pretty costly to do that.
Big marketing thing for the new tenants.
Yeah, right,
You know,
exactly.
You get a billboard that size
Yeah.
on the expressway, and
Mhm.
Yep.
you can see it from everywhere.
Mhm.
Yes.
You know, you put in one secretary in a chair and keep the sign up, you got a lot of exposure.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, is that it, Mr. Cruz?
Yes, thank you.
This item will come forward on our agenda shortly after this meeting. However, I do have a question as it relates to the interior signage. And can we address that in terms of how large they are, how much space they take up, the window, interior window?
Sure. In fact, as a little bit of research, I checked all my ordinances and did some phone calls, so I wanted to make sure I was accurate. Ranges anywhere from about 15% all the way up to 50% of the window area in different communities. Troy actually is exactly our same language. They don't regulate window signage unless it's on the exterior of the window. So that's the only city that I could find that didn't have a percentage of the window as far as the maximum area that could be. Like I said, generally probably 20 to 25% is average. There's only one city that goes up to 50%. That's Berkeley. But they all have percentages, and they all have maximum percentages. So they have a starting percentage that you can have without any effect on your sign area. Then once you go above that, it affects your sign area. So whatever additional square footage you put in the window takes away from your wall sign allowance. And then some cities, like Livonia, has a maximum of 20% of the window, no matter what. It doesn't matter, even if you count it against your sign area, you can't go beyond 20% of the window. So the majority of the cities have regulations on the amount, and anything above the amount has to be counted against your sign area, and I can tell you there's very few businesses that would want to impact their main, wall sign area for window signage to go above that.
But we currently have nothing
Nothing.
in place.
Yes, we currently allow it we don't allow it on the exterior window. That meets the definition of our wall sign. We do, however, do not regulate it on the interior of the window at this time.
And I guess that's what I'm looking for, if we can possibly get a consensus of council, if we could have the interior window regulated, because some of the examples that you showed us has
Yes.
full windows, and
Yes.
it begins to look cluttered, trashy, yeah.
And I have some other things we can talk about if you want to bring language forward into the sign ordinance, which is where there's some definitions actually. When the last time we came before council with the major workup of the sign ordinance, we actually have some definitions built into it already for a definition of a window sign. So it would be a small paragraph to add. It really isn't much to add. So.
Well, without any, I'll recognize you in just a minute, without any objection, I think we can refer this to the administrator. Go ahead, Mr. Cyrus.
A lot, I don't know how many years ago now, we outlawed paper signs in the window.
Not on the inside.
Right, no, we have, it's in the site plan that you won't have paper signs covering the window. It's been in,
Was it ever put in approval, in a site plan approval? It's not in sign ordinance.
I don't know.
Generally, we don't even deal with signs in the site plan process, but.
But you go like Plum Hollow Market, it's glass the windows.
Right.
I am sure we had something about you couldn't put paper signs, big paper signs in the window.
We've had those discussions before.
Yeah, that's my concern, because that's a safety
Right.
issue.
Exactly, and I remember, I was sure that it was in, maybe I'm confused, but I was sure that we had, because it goes along with Ms. Jordan's point, that, there are a number of things in the agreement when a site plan is approved. And it seems to me that was in some of those agreements, especially with gas stations. And what happened was then the gas station said, okay, we won't put paper signs up, they put neon. So for instance, the gas station at the Mogul at 9 in Southfield, or the BP station at Evergreen and 9 Mile. They have tons of signs in the window, and it's all neon. It's not paper.
I remember the discussion, and about the Plum Hollow, too, I remember that.
Plum Hollow was grandfathered. They've been doing paper signs in their window forever.
We were trying to stop it,
If I might, through the chair, some of that has happened because, to be quite honest with you, there aren't too many sign companies making paper signs anymore. It's pretty hard to actually find them anymore. That's why they transition over to vinyl or something like that. So it is a little bit of a transition. There aren't very few little hand painters you can find anymore that will make those Plum Hollow style signs anymore.
Well, I remember when Roy Bell was on Planning Commission, he'd been bringing this up, so that's been a while, but, okay.
All right, well, why don't we get a consensus as to if you want to get a little further into drafting the ordinance that would prohibit the window signage or the interior.
Or limit it.
Or limit it.
Limit it.
Ms. Seymour?
Yes.
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 Fraser? Yes.
Thank you.
Can I ask one other question? And that is, one of the points you made was that it's maintenance of the signs. How do you intend to control that? If a sign goes out and you bring it to the attention of a owner and it just doesn't get fixed, what happens?
We can write a violation. Yeah, we can write a violation
Civil
for that.
infraction within our
Right,
ordinance.
we take him to court, and then the judge would order that he comply with the ordinance, and then he should be fined as well. So there is an enforcement mechanism for that, absolutely, for our sign ordinance.
Is it one that escalates? if you fine him $150, he pays a $150 fine and still doesn't do it.
Well, the thing is, though, remember with the civil infraction, the judge has the equitable powers to say, you gotta now comply with the ordinance. Now, if he or she doesn't comply with the ordinance, now he's in contempt of court. So he gets into a whole other issue. In contempt of court, you can be, I mean, most times people are not gonna ignore, if a judge says, you will fix that, and I'm giving you 10 days to fix it, most people are gonna fix it. They're not gonna disobey. They might disobey the ordinance, but they don't generally disobey a judge. Because you're right, I mean, you could just keep fining him, and he says that it's still easier. Plus, recognize that the more that you bring somebody back, and they kind of are a repeat offender, I think judges start getting very frustrated, and the fines go up. At some point, you will get people's attention.
Because a lot of times, the signs that go out are the signs that are the name of the business, and only half of it. I remember the Majestic Market had a sign that only said magic.
They actually changed that whole sign, that whole wall sign actually ended up, it was so old, built in a way, so old that there was no repairing it. So, I mean, people tend to try and keep repairing these as long as they can, but now with light emitting diodes going in most all signs, you see very little neon anymore unless it's for accent. They tend to stay on a lot longer, less breaks and things like that. So.
Okay, thanks.
If I may, Madam President, staff is prepared to show this presentation again during your regular meeting, if it's your desire for us to do that.
I don't think we need
Does the public at large need it? I mean,
Because you will have a public hearing on this, regulating text amendment.
public hearing, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is the Commissioner's presentation.
Yes, good evening. We wanted to have a little bit of time to discuss overall visioning for the city center, because you do have an item on your regular meeting tonight, which is an amendment of a previously approved overlay development district. And I'm prepared to get into some details of that in a little bit if needed. But I recall that we've had a few discussion items. We had a brainstorming session where a number of ideas came out of the council. We put dots up, and some of the things that the council had said in the past was mixed use, higher density, walkability, placemaking, limiting vehicular traffic and drive-throughs for more pedestrian orientation in the city center. So we wanted to just take the pulse of the council, make sure that those things are still priority with this council as we review development on a case-by-case basis, and then I'll be prepared to get in a little more detail about the proposed amendment to the ODD later this evening. And one of the articles that just coincidentally, the timing I thought was good, is yesterday in the business section of the Detroit Free Press, they were talking about a lot of the development that's happening in Midtown. And there happened to be the Arbor development that was built in 2002 that has commercial on the first floor and residential above. And I think this is more in line with what some of the things I've heard council say in the past, maybe even greater density, maybe even higher buildings. But I thought that was a perfect example to show. And I'll skip right to that right now. So this is an example of something that's built close to the street, has a good pedestrian scale. It has the commercial opportunities on the first floor and office or residential above. In this particular case, it's 3 stories. It could go higher. But again, I think it was important for us to revisit this as the council, kind of hear what you'd like to see as we look at our undeveloped and underdeveloped properties in the city center, because it'll have some impact on possibly how you decide if you want to make an amendment later tonight. I'm happy to take comments or answer questions if the council has questions.
This is exactly what I would like to see to Auburn. I've long been a proponent of mixed use. Let me ask you a question. In the ODD, does it have to be a flat roof?
No, I think we don't have specific like form-based code where we wanted the overlay development district to give flexibility depending on whether if it's in the Downtown Development Authority on Telegraph Road or in the city center. And since in the city center we have more of an eclectic design, we would look to existing buildings, but we didn't necessarily want to limit roof design or materials. We wanted to have it on a case-by-case basis.
The reason I ask is that there are new buildings in Midtown that they're not all flat roof.
That parapets.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit different skyline. But anyhow, this is exactly what I'd like to see there. And I don't know if Mr. Karp agrees, but I believe if you build it, they'll come.
Yes, I am. It's been several years since we met at the library, and Mr. Gibbs did his presentation to us, and there's a name for the style that he showed a lot of, I don't know, no, but it's just, it was a very charming look to the place with fences and, the kind of scalloped look. But there was a lot of this retail on the bottom and residential above. Not too many that were maybe more than 3 floors, although a lot of the better cities, Chicago's a perfect example.
Right.
Parts of New York are a perfect example. Skyscrapers or not, they don't have to be skyscrapers. Chicago especially has a lot of buildings in between, and I think that's what we talked about in the city center was retail on the bottom and residential or office or residential on top, and right from day one we talked about
Right.
that. So I think that's something we have to stick to.
And I think the green in Dayton, Ohio, which is the lifestyle center, has from 2 up to 6 stories, depending on if there's residential,
Right.
mixed use. Those lifestyle centers in Rochester and Lansing and Dayton and Columbus have a new take on a traditional downtown, but they still have the scale and the proportion. And again, from what I've heard is that we don't want to settle for a 1-story or even a 2-story. We want more of that mixed-use, higher density.
I hate the lifestyle description because it just doesn't make any, to me it's, it's not what it doesn't say anything to me. But what he showed was very, it was lively, it was attractive, it had what we used to say pizzazz in a very smart way, it was very sophisticated and charming, I thought. That's what we want to have here.
Mr. Frazier.
Yeah, I think when Arcangelo was here talking about his development of 12 in Southfield, he limited to 3 floors because if you went 4 floors, you had to put an elevator in it.
Yeah, when you start getting up, it changes the cost from stick built to steel, and it requires elevators for access.
Right.
So that does sometimes have a limiting factor on cost.
Yeah, and the cost escalates at that point. But as a planner, what are your feelings on that design? And I don't know that whoever put this together probably had buildings to work with, and they did the best they could.
Well, I think in this particular case, Midtown has a number of the 2 and 3 stories, as well as the larger public buildings with the campus, with the DIA. So this I think fits in with that design. And personally, this is a more modern version of the traditional downtowns. I think we have an eclectic style of architecture here in the city center. So we don't have a Victorian or an Art Deco, or we have a lot of mid-century modern, but it's not defined by that. We don't have a traditional downtown like a Birmingham or Royal Oak or even an Ann Arbor. So I think we could incorporate different styles, but the density, the scale, the relationship to the street, those are all guiding principles of new urbanism, traditional neighborhood design. So as long as those are incorporated, You don't want to have more than 2 to 3 to 1 to the ratio of how wide the street is, otherwise it becomes lost. And so I think this is the beginning of a scale that we could have for some of our infill development.
Yeah, I think it's what we're talking about, you know, the retail on first and either offices or residential above. To me, that looks awful boxy. I mean, and if that is complementary or additive to what's already there, that's one thing. But if it sticks out like a sore thumb, I know we don't have form-based codes, but I think we need to pay attention to that so that it's, you know, it's not like a gong with a crack in it.
Sure. And again, we only illustrate this not so much for the architecture style, but for the types of mixed use.
I don't have any problem with that at
And
all.
that's what I wanted to show as an example. It's not a one-story, and it's not a two-story of just residential, it's a mixed use. It could go higher, it could be stepped back, it could be all kinds of different designs, but I think that's more of the amount of, there's a little wider sidewalks for pedestrians, for outdoor seating, but it's not a 75-foot setback where you have parking in front.
Right.
I think that's what I wanted to try to convey here. And we need to decide as we see infill development and redevelopment of our undeveloped properties, what is the vision? Now, again, we've heard, at least in the city center, less vehicle orientation, more pedestrian orientation, less drive-throughs unless it's part of a larger development, buildings up closer, outdoor seating. Those are the things I've heard, but we haven't really put it down on paper. Of course, the city center's had some, the board has had some concepts that parts and pieces I think fit, but this council hasn't developed the full plan yet. And now that we're being asked to amend the ODD agreement for Arbor Lofts, which you agreed 3 phases, a new concept's coming in that doesn't quite fit from what I've been hearing that the council's looking for.
Yeah, as this becomes more and more developed, this is going to be probably the most expensive land in the city of Southfield.
It's
per
at
square foot.
the prime quarter.
It is,
Yeah.
and we don't want to waste that by putting the wrong thing in there.
Right.
So we need to pay attention to what we're doing.
Is that it, Mr. President?
Yes.
Mr. President?
You know, Terry, you know, the design of having offices or lofts or apartments over commercial has been that way since day one. You go through some of the older cities that are considered charming, Dexter, Chelsea, Oak, and some of the old city, Rochester. You see this everywhere. We seem to have got away from it, and now people, especially young people, are now looking for it. I'll say it, charming.
Right.
And I use the word charming, where it says the architecture is basically incompatible to each other. You don't see contemporary next to colonial or whatever it be. You see a vision of what this little village or charming area is going to look like. And Novi, for example, they went with the downtown brick. Everything in that whole area, even on Grand River, has to use their brick.
Right.
And so I think that the city center has to be something that isn't designed because we just want office or commercial. We want a charming area with parks, design. I agree with Mr. Fraser. I mean, it's cold, there's no design to it, it's just nothing. I mean, there's no design to that. Yet it is what it is. But you could take that same development and bring it in and out a little bit and put some awnings on that. It takes on a whole different character of what that area is. And I think that when you have a vision, you have to, look at an art piece and say, this is, I can tell what that picture is because I know the artist and I know what the artist paints.
Right.
And that's what these little areas have to be if you really want them to be that so-called charming area. And I was just downtown Dexter yesterday, and it is so neat to go through that town. I mean, They did the river walk right downtown, they got an A&W River stand right there downtown. And people just migrate to that. I mean, you've got all the Ann Arbor young people now
Right.
going to Chelsea and Dexter and then that whole vicinity there. And it's because that's what people are seeking today. You know, there was a time when nobody wanted to go downtown. And they went and built out sticks somewhere and they little ranch home and whatever. Today, they want an environment that is going to be cute to be in the bakery, the little things that, you know, this guy makes special bread and this guy makes this, and you go there because it's an experience. And that's what you have to develop. If you're going to make it happen, that's what it has to be. Somebody comes in and says, let's go for coffee. You're not just going to a Starbucks. You're going to a different kind of coffee shop. You know, you might have different kind of bakery items in it. And you know, you may have an old hardware store next to it. But that all comes together and comes under that title of the little town really is charming to us.
Right. And I agree, and if I could just comment that many of those towns that we reference and we think are charming were built 100 and 150 years ago, and in many cases the city said no more than 2 or 3 stories high. We were built, as you know, in the auto-dominated 60s and 70s with large setbacks, and this city was innovative in the sense that they did encourage higher development. So now we have to try to retrofit in to try to create that sense of place, pedestrian scale, and work with the fact that we do have 30-story buildings here.
Yeah.
And so we got to find some type of hybrid.
Yeah, I agree with you. But when you do, you've got to stick to it. And that's why you have to have a vision of what this is going to look like and some concepts of what the buildings will look like that are going to go in, or at least you're going to steer people to build if they want to be in that area. And you know, it doesn't really matter to a guy going into business if he needs 200 square feet, 3,000 square feet. They don't really care what the outside looks like as far as character. They just have to use the inside. So I told you about in Highland Park, right next to the hockey rink there, they built condominiums. And they're cute. They're nice brick. But they got balconies out on the main street. And there's chairs out there, stacking chairs. There's barbecues out there and awnings out there, and the garage is on the inside, and they go in the inside where the garage is, and then it's like their backyard. And I think it takes away from that development, and that's what I've been kind of saying all this time with this development is that, you know, just to develop because I can build a building that somebody today needs and wants to use, but tomorrow it's going to be passé.
Thank you. You mentioned, Terry, the very thing that I want to talk about, and that is, this is not a piece of vacant land. We have a lot of buildings here that are high-rise. We can't just go in and build a cute little Victorian village because we don't have that kind of space. But what we have to do with these office buildings, if we can, is on the main floor, and many of them will want to do this, put retail. A lot of them will want to do this. Some of them can't do it. But doing that gets us to retail, and they will be high-rise office buildings, 1 or 2 of the apartments. So we have to take the land that we can do something more, I don't want to use that cutesy kind of Victorian, because it doesn't fit there. You know, but we can have some areas that can be low-rise, that can be more pedestrian-friendly. We're going to have a mix of all of that. So we have to try to make it, I don't want to say artful, but in a way I do, because it has to work. And that's, if it were vacant land, we could have everything that sounds like Robert Gibbs wanted. It would be lovely. We don't have that. Right. So we have to take what we have and build, I know you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
But that's blending the two. And I think a lot of these office buildings, or I think some of them, could be encouraged and might want to have retail on the first floor. And they can still have all, tried it in the town center, it didn't work because people were things, and I worked this for a long time, so I actually saw the evolution of it. People wanted to go home at 5 o'clock, 5:30, get out of there, and they didn't live there. So I think we have a unique opportunity.
So I know time's running short, and you have another item. If I could just recap.
You gotta keep
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the original picture you put up there for us. I mean, when I saw that, it encompassed to me the work, live, and play concept for us that we look to seek to attract here in the city. That building to me looks very sharp and sleek to me. Okay, I like that. I like the the number of floors. I wouldn't want to see any big towering type facilities necessarily at this point, starting off at least. But that looks good to me, and I would like to see more types of development. I would say if we needed to change over time, it's adaptable. It looks like an adaptable type of building to things change over time. But right now, I think that's what people are looking for. That we got plenty of homes and residential areas around here, homes that are not filled with folks that are looking for that type of experience. But there's nothing in our city right now that speaks to that experience. And so, I don't want to have to go to Royal Oak down Main Street to get it. I want to come down Evergreen Road to get it. And that is what I'm looking for. And I think that there's a strong contingency of residents and people in the surrounding areas that would rather come here to Southfield to have that experience. And I would like to see this type of development continue here in the city and move forward in the city.
I think that's a great example, Terry, and the timing is right in terms of what we're looking for, but it's really not just about site plan, it's about, the entire ODD district and what we want in the mixed use with residential possibly, but I think that's where we are and that's what the individuals are stating now.
Right. So just as a wrap-up, if I could. So tonight, Arbor Garden Apartments will come to you under site plan, but it really is, again, to reemphasize, an amendment to the previously approved overlay development district. I will spend some time going through the chronology of how we got to this point, what the applicant is looking for, and then the council can decide if this current version fits in with your vision, or maybe they need to go back to the drawing board and come back with what I'm hearing is more higher density mixed use development. But that's what's before us tonight is not only the site plan, but an amendment to what was previously approved. There was 3 phases. I will go through that for the council before you act tonight, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We had a little chat before the meeting, and I wasn't quite sure. I had the memo that you got. We don't want to send him away, just reject the site plan. We want to work with him. So you were suggesting that we keep this contract on the ODD?
Well, the contract is in place already.
Right.
And in order to
We don't want
change
to throw
it,
that away.
well, in order to change it, both parties have to agree.
Right.
So you're going to be asked to vote either up or down tonight what's proposed in front of you. What I'm suggesting, because what I'm hearing about, what you're looking for overall, is that if the council is not comfortable voting in favor of what's proposed, recommend that he comes back through the process with some changes that are closer to what your vision is.
Okay.
And that, again, would require an amendment to the ODD. But we wanted to frame that even though the uses and the dimensions are consistent with your overlay development agreement, the concept is different than what you previously approved, and the concept is different, or maybe is not far enough along. And that's important for us to discuss to encourage the developer, should you decide to go that route, to come back with something that's more closer to a higher density, larger building. That's all we were saying.
Okay, I'm going to have our attorney wait.
Yeah, I just want to, again, just so that we're all really clear what we're being asked to do. You have a signed overlay development district agreement on this piece of property. And in that agreement, we built in a master development plan. The master development plan for that piece, that's the subject tonight, has a 10,000 square foot retail building there. And what he's saying now is, I don't want to or don't think it's marketable, for whatever reason, I don't want to put up this 10,000 square foot retail. I want to do these kind of arbor garden apartments along Civic Center and a very small, maybe retail component of 2,500 square feet. So it is not just a land use. You have to decide, do you want to amend the overlay development district agreement, and do you want to change the master development plan? And so that, it's a little bit different in front of you tonight than a strict site plan would be.
And that can't happen, I mean, we can suggest that he come back with something.
Sure. But I do think that he has asked, and this was clear even from his attorney's letter, they want this body to vote either yes or no on his proposed amendment to the existing overlay development district agreement and the master development plan to remove that 10,000 square foot retail and put in that strip of the Arbor Gardens, I think it was 13 units?
14.
14 units with that very small retail at the corner. So that's what he's asking. And again, from the attorney's letter, he does want a yes or no on that potential of amending the plan. And of course, you're right, Mr. Stiver, if you wanted to suggest, we're certainly open to keep talking about an amendment, but it has to be something that, you know, is in our vision, that's fine.
Right. Okay.
Madam Chair, we have a contract on what is supposed to be on there. And now, one party wants to change their agreement. So it's up to us, do you want to change the agreement and change it, or don't you want to change the agreement? So
That's right.
we're all in agreement, so it's good.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Because I know I spent this, but this is what I really want.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is the proposed Human Rights Ordinance Designed.
Yeah, thank you. So we know at the last COW, there was a discussion about placing the proposed Human Rights Ordinance, discrimination prohibited, on the table for introduction and then enactment. At the time, I still hadn't worked out the kind of the enforcement mechanism. I wanted to have a chance to talk about those things. So kind of got a handle on that, and we have that on the regular agenda tonight for introduction and approval. And the only snag I hit, and so I wanted to kind of explain what I did, because it's a little different than what you saw even 2 weeks ago. And it's complicated by this. We have an existing ordinance on the books, it's been on the books since like 1980-something, called the Fair Neighborhood Practices Ordinance. And that ordinance was really a non-discrimination, but in a very small segment. It had to do with housing and real estate. And we said in that ordinance, you can't discriminate in housing and real estate transactions based on the categories that were pretty much what was under Elliott Larson. So race, color, religion, marital status, those typical kinds of protected classes at the time. But again, it only had to do with housing. So when I was charged with now putting together a much more encompassing human rights ordinance that didn't just deal with housing, we were going to go into public accommodation, employment. I needed to do something with the fact that I already had an ordinance that had a little piece of what we wanted to do. So here's what I did. In substantively, what you saw 2 weeks ago in terms of that language, it's all in this ordinance. And so is the existing Fair Neighborhood Practices Ordinance. I've kind of melded the two together. And so I take out the existing Chapter 122, which is the Fair Neighborhood Practices, and I now put the non-discrimination, the Human Rights Ordinance in place of it. So it'll appear in Chapter 122. And basically, it talks now about no discrimination based on, again, our traditional kind of protected classes, but to that we've added sexual orientation and gender identity, which are the ones that were talked about in the legislative context last year at the committee. So it does everything that we've talked about and that the legislative committee recommended that we adopt, but it also just builds it into one ordinance. So if anybody's looking at what kinds of things are illegal discrimination in Southfield, they'll go to one ordinance as opposed to having to try to wade through two. What I do is I propose to make them civil infractions, so a violation could be issued. Also say that, because again, we don't know we don't anticipate, a floodgate of people coming in and asking for our enforcement, but we could have it, because we've outlawed it now. But in appropriate circumstances, I've kind of left the discretion of the city attorney's office to say, for example, if somebody came in and said, I think I didn't get a promotion at work because of my race, you know, we know that that's a protected class under Elliott Larson, and we know that it also could be under the Department of Justice, that we could make referrals in instances where there maybe is a better enforcement mechanism where they can actually, you know, call witnesses in and they can order things. In those instances that we could try to refer some things out, but obviously in instances, for example, sexual preference or orientation or gender identity, there's no other protection out there under the state law, so of course we would handle those. So again, we don't anticipate that we're going to have thousands of cases coming in, but I wanted to at least put that flexibility in case we did, if there were other areas. Again, the Civil Rights Commission for the state, Department of Justice, they have those pretty, you know, very intricate enforcement divisions with all kinds of powers, and in the appropriate case, probably a referral to those entities would be good. If not, we'll handle them and we'll just kind of see how we're going, whether we have the ability to really enforce this ordinance. If it becomes problematic, I mean, again, some cities, you know, actually would have like a department or a Human Rights Commission, and that commission would handle that. So maybe we'll see that we need to do something like that. But without the experience of knowing how much we're going to get, I think we're just kind of suggesting how we go forward, and if we need to tweak things as we go, we certainly could come back and do that. But right now, it does prohibit all of the discrimination in public accommodations, employment, and housing based on those categories that we've talked about.
No, quick question. If saying this passes tonight, does that become part of the city's employment, non-discrimination?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, if we violated it, I mean, somebody could come and...
But, I mean, I think it needs to be expressly conveyed, not just assumed.
Well, we also have policies. I mean, we have a charter provision that says, you know, that the city does not discriminate as well, so...
But that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
You know, in my former employment, when that policy changed, it was in lots of other things. It wasn't just in, you know, it was Title IX, having to do with sports and opportunities for females, but it was in employment, it was, you know, any number of things regarding students' rights.
So are you suggesting, just so I understand, like that we actually put together a policy?
It needs to be comprehensive.
Sure.
It's not just, this is on the books and it applies to every place else. I assume we're going to look inward and
come up with a policy maybe that really incorporates all of this.
You're right.
Okay.
It's something that, you know, I think there's a non-discrimination thing on the website for employment.
Right.
And so that, I would assume that would be changed then.
It would definitely need to be changed because we're picking up additional categories. Right.
Is the law the law?
Well, it is, but remember, right now, there is no law in Southfield or the state of Michigan that would pick up...
We passed an ordinance, that is basically a city law.
Absolutely.
And that should cover everything that's in the confines of the city.
Right. But I think what's being suggested is just that we make sure that all of our policies in the city for our own employment situation...
And they adhere to the law.
Right, and that we make sure that it's specific. For example, you know, sexual orientation or gender identity would not be in any existing policy that we have, so we'll have to make sure that we now pick up that as a protected class as well.
Things need to be updated.
Right.
So do you serve as city attorney, are you the CEO officer for the city?
No, that would actually be Lori? I don't know that we have, I mean, certainly any complaints of that would go to HR, but I don't know that we have somebody specifically designated. But I do think that, you know, if we have a sexual harassment policy that says if you believe you're the victim, you go to the HR department, so I think to some extent that...
Yeah, I have two comments. The first is on page 8, section B, when you make reference to Mr. Department of Civil Rights, Department of Justice, I think U.S.
Probably just, yeah.
Okay,
so U.S. Department of...
Equal Employment.
Gotcha, okay.
And then also, kind of piggybacking on Mr. Cruz's question. When you look at paragraph B, it does give the power to the city attorney to basically decide, do we want to put a date on deciding if we need a human rights committee? No, not time limit, but not having all the power within the city attorney's office.
So maybe a report back in a period to
To
say,
see if we,
whether we need something
right,
else.
something else,
Um,
or another committee, or.
Sure, if you want to, would 6 months be good? I mean, I don't know if you put it in the ordinance, but you would just direct me.
Or
that-
year.
You want it, or a year, I'm fine with that. We report back on what our experience is and whether we need to deal with it in a different fashion. Okay? All right, and I will make that change as well, the one.
We'll move to the communication portion of our agenda, Mr. Gerard Miller.
Is it?
He stepped out.
Yeah, he just left.
Somebody wants to get him, if not, not here. Not here,
Michael?
are there any other items,
I think it's long gone.
any other items council would like to bring forward? Okay, we'll declare this meeting.